"Excuse me, sir. Have we met?" Ray Charles asked politely when he heard someone working quietly in the corner of his dressing room at Chicago's Auditorium Theater. The voice belonged to Cornelius "Cork" Whitfield, the venue's longtime janitor who had been trying to finish cleaning before the famous musician arrived for his March 1973 concert. Cork looked up from where he was emptying the wastebasket, his weathered face showing surprise that anyone had addressed him directly. At 75 years old, he had been working at the Auditorium Theater for nearly 40 years, and in all that time, no performer had ever spoken to him with such courtesy, let alone asked his name. "No sir, Mr. Charles," Cork replied, straightening up despite the arthritis that made his movements slow and careful. "I'm just Cork Whitfield. Been cleaning these dressing rooms since 1933. I was trying to finish up before you got here, but I move a bit slower than I used to." Ray Charles set down his white cane and extended his hand. "Well, Mr. Whitfield, it's a pleasure to meet you. Please, don't let me interrupt your work. I'm just grateful for how clean and comfortable you've made this space." Cork stared at the outstretched hand for a moment, uncertain. In 4 decades of working at the venue, he could count on one hand the number of times anyone had shaken his hand or treated him as anything more than part of the furniture. Slowly, he reached out and shook Ray Charles's hand, feeling the genuine warmth in the gesture. "That's very kind of you to say, sir," Cork managed, his voice thick with emotion he hadn't expected to feel. "Most folks don't much notice what I do around here." Ray Charles tilted his head, listening not just to Cork's words but to the tone beneath them. 40 years, you said. That's remarkable dedication. You must have seen this place change quite a bit over the decades." As Cork continued his work, he found himself talking more than he had in months. Ray Charles had a way of listening that made people feel heard, and Cork began sharing stories about the theater's history, the performers he'd watched come and go, and the changes he'd witnessed in the entertainment industry. "Oh yes, sir," Cork said, carefully polishing a mirror. "I've seen them all come through here. The big bands in the 30s and 40s, the jazz greats in the 50s, all the rock and roll fellows in the 60s. Times sure have changed, but music, well, music always stays powerful, you know." Ray Charles leaned forward with interest. "You sound like someone who appreciates music. Do you play any instruments yourself?" Cork's face lit up with a shy smile. "Well, I used to play a little harmonica when I was younger. Nothing fancy, just campfire songs and such. Haven't touched it in years though." He paused, then added quietly, "Don't have much cause for music these days. What happened to change that?" Ray Charles asked gently. Cork's expression grew distant, and he was quiet for a moment before responding. "Well, sir, I suppose life just got in the way. War, work, raising a family, you know how it is. The harmonica got put away and never came back out." Ray Charles nodded thoughtfully. "Which war, if you don't mind my asking?" "Korea," Cork replied simply. 1950 to 53. Came back and needed work, was grateful Mr. Sterling's father gave me this job." What Ray Charles couldn't see, but sensed in Cork's voice, was the weight of memories the older man carried. Cork had been a medic in Korea, serving with the 2nd Infantry Division during some of the war's most brutal fighting. He had saved dozens of lives under fire, earning commendations he never talked about, and a Medal of Honor he kept locked away in a drawer at home. The conversation was interrupted by Bartholomew, Bart Sterling, the venue manager, who burst into the dressing room without knocking. "Mr. Charles, I do apologize for the delay in your sound check. We had some union issues to resolve, but we're ready for you now." His eyes barely glanced at Cork, who had immediately stepped back into the corner, becoming invisible again. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling," Ray Charles replied. "I was just having a fascinating conversation with Mr. Whitfield here about the theater's history. 40 years of service, that's remarkable institutional knowledge." Bart Sterling looked confused for a moment, as if he couldn't quite place who Ray Charles was talking about. "Oh, you mean Cork," he said dismissively. "Yes, he's been around forever. Cork, you should be finished in here by now. Mr. Charles needs to prepare." The casual dismissal stung, and Ray Charles could hear it in the way Cork's movements became more hurried and apologetic. "Of course, sir," Cork mumbled, gathering his cleaning supplies. "I'll get out of your way, Mr. Charles." "Thank you for the kind words, Mr. Whitfield," Ray Charles said firmly. "There's no need to hurry on my account. A man who served this institution for 40 years deserves respect, not to be rushed out like an inconvenience." The comment hung in the air, and Bart Sterling shifted uncomfortably. He had never thought much about Cork one way or the other. The old janitor was simply part of the building's infrastructure, like the heating system or the electrical wiring. But hearing Ray Charles speak about him with such regard made Sterling suddenly aware of his own thoughtlessness. Yes, of course," Sterling said awkwardly. "Cork, take your time. Mr. Charles, shall we proceed to the sound check when you're ready?" After Sterling left, Ray Charles turned back to Cork. "Mr. Whitfield, I hope you'll do me the honor of staying for tonight's performance. I'd like to dedicate a song to the men and women who keep places like this running, often without the recognition they deserve." Cork's eyes widened. "Oh, Mr. Charles, that's not necessary. I usually just go home after my shift. Don't much belong out there with all the fancy folks. Every person who appreciates music belongs at a music performance," Ray Charles replied. "Besides, I have a feeling you've got stories that would put my adventures to shame. A man who served his country and this theater for decades has earned the right to enjoy both." That evening, as Ray Charles took the stage before a packed house of 4,000 people, he did something unexpected. Before beginning his first song, he spoke directly to the audience about the importance of recognizing the people who work behind the scenes to make live music possible. "Tonight, I want to acknowledge someone very special," Ray Charles said into the microphone. "Mr. Cornelius Whitfield has been caring for this beautiful theater for 40 years. He's a Korean War veteran who has served his community with the same dedication he once showed his country. He's in the audience tonight, and this next song is for him and all the unsung heroes who make our world a little better every day." The spotlight found Cork sitting in a seat near the back of the theater, looking overwhelmed by the sudden attention. The audience applauded, but it was different from the usual polite acknowledgement. It was genuine appreciation, sparked by Ray Charles's heartfelt introduction. As Ray Charles began playing "America the Beautiful," Cork felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: recognition, respect, and a sense of belonging. The song took on deeper meaning as he thought about his service in Korea, his decades of quiet work at the theater, and the simple dignity of contributing to something larger than himself. During intermission, something remarkable happened. Instead of ignoring Cork as they had for years, several audience members approached him to shake his hand and thank him for his service, both to the country and to the theater. Security Chief Montgomery "Monty" Fairchild, who had worked alongside Cork for 15 years but barely acknowledged his existence, came over to apologize for his past indifference. "Cork," Monty said, extending his hand, "I had no idea about your military service. I want to thank you properly, and I'm sorry it took Mr. Charles to open my eyes to what should have been obvious." The transformation continued after the concert. Word spread among the theater staff about Cork's war record and his decades of dedicated service. People who had worked alongside him for years suddenly saw him clearly for the first time. The custodial staff, who had always respected Cork's work ethic, learned about his military honors and began treating him not just as a colleague, but as a hero. Bart Sterling was particularly affected by the evening's events. The next morning, he called Cork into his office, not to reprimand him, as had happened a few times over the years, but to apologize and to discuss how the theater could better honor its longtime employees. "Cork, I owe you an apology," Sterling said, gesturing for the older man to sit down. 40 years of faithful service deserved better recognition than I've given you. I'd like to change that, starting now." Sterling proposed establishing an employee recognition program, with Cork as its first honoree. He also suggested that Cork's knowledge of the theater's history could be valuable for the educational tours they were considering offering to school groups. But perhaps the most meaningful change came from Ray Charles himself. Before leaving Chicago, he visited Cork at his small apartment on the south side, bringing with him a professional quality harmonica. "Mr. Whitfield," Ray Charles said, "you mentioned that you used to play harmonica. I thought maybe it was time to bring music back into your life." Cork held the instrument with trembling hands, running his fingers over its polished surface. "Mr. Charles, I don't know what to say. It's been so many years, music doesn't forget," Ray Charles replied. "It's like riding a bicycle. Once it's in your soul, it stays there. And from what I observed yesterday, you have music in your soul." Over the following months, Cork began playing harmonica again, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. He started bringing his harmonica to work, playing soft melodies, during his breaks in empty parts of the theater. The music seemed to energize him, making his work feel less like drudgery and more like a contribution to the venue's artistic mission. The other employees began to notice the change in Cork's demeanor. He walked taller, smiled more often, and seemed to take even greater pride in his work. The invisible man had become visible, not just to others, but to himself. Ray Charles returned to the Auditorium Theater several times over the following years, and he always made a point of spending time with Cork. Their friendship deepened as they discovered shared experiences and values. Cork's stories about the theater's history and the performers he'd encountered became treasured conversations that Ray Charles looked forward to. In 1975, when Cork reached his 77th birthday, the theater held its first annual Employee Appreciation Dinner. Cork was the guest of honor, and Ray Charles surprised him by appearing to perform a special concert for the staff and their families. During that performance, Ray Charles invited Cork to join him on stage, encouraging him to play harmonica on Amazing Grace. The moment was captured by a photographer from the Chicago Tribune, and the image of the two men, one a world-famous musician, the other a humble janitor, making music together, became a symbol of dignity, respect, and the power of human connection. The story of Ray Charles and Cork Whitfield spread beyond Chicago, inspiring similar recognition programs in venues across the country. The entertainment industry began to acknowledge that great performances were possible only because of the dedicated work of countless behind-the-scenes employees who deserved recognition and respect. Cork continued working at the Auditorium Theater until 1978, when he retired at the age of 80. His retirement party was attended by hundreds of people, including many performers who had worked at the venue over the years and had heard about the janitor who had been honored by Ray Charles. The theater established the Cork Whitfield Service Award, given annually to an employee who exemplified dedication, integrity, and quiet excellence. Each recipient received a harmonica engraved with Cork's motto, which had developed from his conversations with Ray Charles. Service is music. Both require harmony, dedication, and respect for others. Cork lived 5 more years after retirement, spending his time playing harmonica at senior centers and veterans' hospitals, sharing the music that Ray Charles had helped him rediscover. When he passed away in 1983, his funeral was attended by over 300 people, including Ray Charles, who performed Amazing Grace as a final tribute to his friend. The educational impact of Cork's story extended into academic institutions as well. Business schools began using his case as an example of how organizational culture could either nurture or neglect human potential. Students learned that effective leadership required recognizing the contributions of all team members, not just those in visible positions. The story also influenced research in organizational psychology, particularly studies examining the relationship between employee recognition and workplace satisfaction. Cork's transformation after receiving acknowledgement from Ray Charles provided compelling evidence for theories about the importance of dignity and respect in motivating workers. Dr. Robert Kellerman at Northwestern University's Kellogg School of Management conducted a longitudinal study of workplace recognition programs inspired by Cork's story. His research demonstrated that simple acknowledgement of employee contributions could significantly improve job satisfaction, reduce turnover, and increase productivity. The Cork-Whitfield effect, as Dr. Kellerman termed it, showed that recognition didn't need to be elaborate or expensive to be meaningful. A sincere acknowledgement of someone's value and contributions could transform their entire relationship with their work and their sense of self-worth. The research influenced corporate training programs throughout the 1970s and 1980s, as companies began to understand that treating all employees with dignity wasn't just morally right, but also economically beneficial. The cost of implementing recognition programs was minimal compared to the savings from reduced turnover and increased productivity. The entertainment industry's adoption of these principles had particularly visible effects. Concert venues that implemented comprehensive staff appreciation programs reported better employee morale, improved customer service, and enhanced reputations within the industry. These improvements attracted better performers and audiences, creating positive cycles of success. The Auditorium Theater itself became a model for other venues seeking to create more inclusive and respectful workplace cultures. Representatives from theaters across the country visited Chicago to observe their employee recognition programs and learn how to adapt similar approaches for their own organizations. The theater's management also began involving long-term employees like Cork in decision-making processes, recognizing that their institutional knowledge and perspective could contribute valuable insights to planning and operations. This collaborative approach improved both the quality of decisions and employee engagement. Cork's role as an informal historian for the theater led to the creation of a comprehensive archive documenting the venue's history from the perspective of workers as well as performers. This archive became a valuable resource for researchers studying the evolution of American entertainment and labor practices. The archive project also provided opportunities for other long-term employees to share their stories and contribute to the institutional memory. These oral history interviews revealed a rich tapestry of experiences that had previously gone unrecorded, providing insights into how the entertainment industry had changed over decades. The success of the archive project inspired similar initiatives at other cultural institutions. Museums, theaters, and concert halls across the country began collecting stories from their workers, recognizing that these perspectives provided important context for understanding their institutional histories. The American Federation of Musicians took notice of these developments and began advocating for better treatment of venue support staff as part of their broader mission to improve working conditions in the entertainment industry. They recognized that creating respectful environments for all workers ultimately benefited performers as well. The union's advocacy efforts led to improved working conditions, better benefits, and more recognition for behind-the-scenes workers in venues across the country. These improvements helped attract and retain skilled workers, which improved the overall quality of live entertainment experiences. The story of Ray Charles and Cork Whitfield also influenced discussions about aging and retirement in America. Cork's vitality and continued contributions well into his 70s challenged assumptions about older workers and their value to organizations. Gerontologists studying Cork's case noted that his renewed sense of purpose after receiving recognition from Ray Charles appeared to have positive effects on his physical and mental health. His increased social engagement and musical activities seemed to contribute to his overall well-being and longevity. These observations contributed to research on successful aging and the importance of continued engagement and recognition for older adults. The findings influenced policies in senior care facilities and programs designed to support aging workers. The Cork-Whitfield Service Award at the Auditorium Theater continued to evolve, eventually becoming a model for similar programs in other industries. The award criteria expanded to recognize not just longevity of service, but also innovation, mentorship, and positive impact on workplace culture. Recipients of the award often became informal ambassadors for the principles it represented, sharing their experiences and encouraging similar recognition programs in their communities and professional networks. This peer-to-peer advocacy proved more effective than top-down mandates in spreading awareness about workplace dignity. The award also generated scholarship funds that helped children of theater employees pursue higher education, creating pathways for upward mobility while honoring the service of their parents. This intergenerational support reflected the broader principle that recognizing workers meant investing in their families and futures as well. Ray Charles continued to support these initiatives throughout his career, often performing benefit concerts to raise funds for employee recognition programs and worker advocacy organizations. His commitment to these causes became an integral part of his public persona and artistic legacy. The influence of Cork's story on Ray Charles's music became more apparent in his later albums, which featured more songs about dignity, service, and the value of all human beings regardless of their circumstances. These themes resonated with audiences and critics, adding depth and social consciousness to his artistic output. The influence on labor relations extended beyond the entertainment industry. Manufacturing companies, service organizations, and government agencies began implementing recognition programs modeled on the principles demonstrated in Cork's story. The ripple effects touched millions of workers across various sectors. Manufacturing plants in the Midwest began holding annual recognition ceremonies for long-term employees, inspired by the Cork Whitfield Service Award. These ceremonies revealed countless stories of dedicated workers whose contributions had gone unnoticed for decades. The recognition led to improved workplace morale and reduced turnover in industries struggling with labor shortages. The federal government took notice of these workplace culture improvements. The Department of Labor began studying the relationship between employee recognition and productivity, finding that simple acknowledgement programs could significantly reduce workplace accidents, improve quality control, and increase overall efficiency. These findings influenced federal employment policies, leading to the establishment of recognition programs for government workers. The principles first demonstrated in a Chicago theater began affecting how millions of federal employees were treated and valued in their daily work. The story's impact on popular culture was equally significant. Television producers began developing shows that featured working-class characters with dignity and complexity, moving away from stereotypical portrayals. Cork's story had demonstrated that every person had depth, history, and value, regardless of their job title. Hollywood screenwriters began incorporating themes of workplace dignity into their scripts. Movies featuring janitors, security guards, and other service workers began portraying them as complete human beings with rich inner lives rather than background characters or comic relief. The influence extended to advertising as well. Companies began featuring real employees in their marketing materials, celebrating the people who made their success possible. This authenticity resonated with consumers who were increasingly skeptical of polished, artificial marketing messages. The Cork Whitfield Foundation, established by Ray Charles and other supporters, became a leading voice in advocacy for workplace dignity. The foundation provided grants to organizations developing innovative recognition programs and funded legal support for workers facing age discrimination or workplace harassment. The foundation's research initiatives contributed to academic understanding of workplace psychology and the factors that contributed to employee satisfaction and productivity. Their studies were cited in congressional hearings about labor policy and influenced federal regulations protecting older workers. International attention to the American employee recognition movement grew throughout the 1980s. Delegations from European and Asian countries visited Chicago to study the Auditorium Theater's programs and learn how to adapt similar approaches for their own cultural contexts. The principles demonstrated in Cork's story proved universally applicable across different societies and economic systems. The basic human need for recognition and respect transcended cultural boundaries, making the Chicago model relevant in diverse international settings. Cork's personal legacy continued through the harmonica program he had established at the Senior Center. After his death, the program was renamed the Cork Whitfield Music Circle and expanded to serve multiple locations throughout Chicago. The program provided not just musical instruction but social connection and purpose for hundreds of elderly participants. The program's success attracted attention from gerontologists studying successful aging. Research showed that participants in the music program maintained better cognitive function, had lower rates of depression, and reported higher life satisfaction compared to control groups. These findings contributed to broader understanding of how creative engagement could promote healthy aging. Senior centers across the country began implementing music programs modeled on Cork's approach, expanding access to therapeutic musical activities for thousands of older adults. Ray Charles continued to visit Chicago regularly, maintaining his connection to Cork's legacy through performances and advocacy work. His concerts often featured dedications to workplace heroes and aging Americans, keeping Cork's story alive in public consciousness. The Chicago visits also provided opportunities for Ray Charles to meet with current and former Auditorium theater employees, learning about their experiences and ensuring that the principles Cork had represented continued to influence the venue's culture. These conversations influenced Ray Charles's understanding of how individual acts of recognition could create lasting institutional change. He began speaking more frequently about the responsibility of public figures to use their platforms for promoting dignity and respect for all people. The story serves as a reminder that every person has dignity and worth, regardless of their job title or social status. Ray Charles understood that treating people with respect and recognition could transform not just individual lives but entire communities. Cork Whitfield's story became a lasting example of how a simple gesture of acknowledgement could reveal the hidden heroes who surround us every day. The enduring legacy of that March evening in 1973 continued to influence American workplace culture well into the 21st century. The principles demonstrated through Ray Charles's interaction with Cork Whitfield became foundational to modern human resources practices, employee engagement strategies, and organizational leadership development programs. Business schools continued to study the Cork Whitfield phenomenon decades after his death, analyzing how recognition and dignity could transform workplace dynamics. The case became required reading in management courses, demonstrating that effective leadership required seeing and valuing every member of an organization. The Auditorium Theater's employee recognition program evolved into a comprehensive model that was studied and replicated by organizations worldwide. The annual Cork Whitfield Service Awards ceremony became a prestigious event in Chicago's cultural calendar, attracting national attention and inspiring similar programs in other cities. The scholarship program associated with the award had far-reaching impacts on families throughout the Chicago area. By 2000, over 200 students had received educational assistance through the program, many becoming the first in their families to attend college. These educational opportunities created generational changes that honored Cork's legacy while opening new possibilities for working families. The oral history archive that had begun with Cork's story grew to include thousands of interviews with venue workers from across the entertainment industry. This collection became an invaluable resource for researchers studying American labor history, providing perspectives that had previously been absent from academic scholarship. The archive project revealed patterns of dedication, creativity, and resilience among support workers that challenged stereotypical portrayals of blue-collar employment. These stories contributed to more nuanced understanding of American working life and the contributions made by people in service occupations. Cork's influence on Ray Charles's artistic development continued throughout the musician's career. Songs like Working Man's Blues and Dignity drew directly from themes explored in their friendship, bringing messages about respect and recognition to millions of listeners worldwide. The musical legacy extended beyond Ray Charles's own recordings. Other artists began writing songs inspired by Cork's story, creating a body of work that celebrated the contributions of unsung heroes and challenged listeners to notice the people around them who made their lives better through quiet service. The harmonica that Ray Charles had given to Cork became a symbol of renewal and possibility. After Cork's death, it was donated to the Chicago History Museum, where it became part of an exhibit about ordinary people who had extraordinary impact on their communities. The museum exhibit, titled Hidden Heroes, The Cork Whitfield Story, toured nationally and internationally, sharing the message that dignity and recognition could transform lives. The exhibit inspired similar projects in other museums, creating a broader movement to document and celebrate the contributions of overlooked individuals. The psychiatric and social work communities embraced Cork's story as an example of how recognition and purpose could positively impact mental health and well-being. The case became part of training programs for healthcare workers, social workers, and counselors who worked with aging populations. Research conducted by the National Institute on Aging used Cork's experience as part of longitudinal studies on successful aging. The findings contributed to understanding how social engagement, recognition, and sense of purpose could promote cognitive health and emotional well-being in older adults. These research findings influenced federal aging policies and Medicare coverage decisions, leading to expanded support for programs that promoted social engagement and purposeful activity among older Americans. The ripple effects of Cork's story continued to benefit people he had never met. The international impact of Cork's story grew through cultural exchange programs and diplomatic initiatives. American embassies around the world use the story as an example of American values in action, demonstrating how individual acts of kindness could create systemic change. The story resonated particularly strongly in countries dealing with aging populations and workplace dignity issues. Government delegations from Japan, Germany, and other nations visited Chicago to study the workplace recognition programs that had emerged from Cork's experience. These international exchanges led to the adaptation of Cork's principles in diverse cultural contexts, proving that the fundamental human need for recognition and respect transcended national boundaries and cultural differences. The Cork Whitfield Foundation continued its work well beyond its founder's lifetime, evolving into a major force in workplace advocacy and aging rights. The Foundation's research initiatives contributed to landmark legislation protecting older workers from discrimination and ensuring dignity in employment practices. By the Foundation's 30th anniversary in 2003, it had distributed over $50 million in grants supporting workplace dignity programs and had influenced policy changes affecting millions of American workers. The Foundation's work had become a permanent part of the landscape of worker advocacy and aging rights. The story serves as a reminder that every person has dignity and worth regardless of their job title or social status. Ray Charles understood that treating people with respect and recognition could transform not just individual lives but entire communities. Cork Whitfield's story became a lasting example of how a simple gesture of acknowledgement could reveal the hidden heroes who surround us every day. The story serves as a reminder that every person has dignity and worth regardless of their job title or social status. Ray Charles understood that treating people with respect and recognition could transform not just individual lives but entire communities. Cork Whitfield's story became a lasting example of how a simple gesture of acknowledgement could reveal the hidden heroes who surround us every day.